Blood stains the morning frost on a peaceful Montana farm. The Mexican cartel thought this would be an easy target, just another stubborn old rancher to break. They had no idea they were walking into a kill zone designed by Marcus Stone, the deadliest Delta Force commander in American history. For 30 years, he was a shadow that haunted battlefields across the globe. His missions were so classified, even the Pentagon denies they happened. Now he tends his cattle and grows his crops, finding peace in honest work. But when the cartel threatened his land, they awakened something deadly, something that remembers every kill, every mission, every way to make men disappear. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning frost crunched under Marcus Stone's boots as he walked his property line. Dawn painted the Montana mountains in shades of amber and gold, the kind of beauty that still made him pause even after 15 years on this land. His German shepherd, Ghost, trotted beside him, alert and watchful as always. At 58, Marcus moved with the fluid grace of a much younger man. His eyes constantly scanned his surroundings, old habits that had kept him alive through 3 decades of combat. The ranch sprawled across 800 acres of prime Montana Valley, bordered by dense forest to the north and rolling hills. To the south, perfect terrain for defense, though he tried not to think that way anymore. "Something's not right, boy," Marcus muttered, kneeling to examine fresh tire tracks in the mud. Ghost growled softly in agreement. The tracks were deep, made by heavy vehicles, and they weren't from any local trucks he recognized. More concerning was the pattern: 3 vehicles moving in tactical formation, maintaining proper intervals. Sarah Mitchell, his closest neighbor, pulled up in her weathered pickup. "Marcus, thank God you're out here. Did you hear about the Hendersons?" Marcus straightened, brushing dirt from his jeans. "What about them?" "They're gone. Just packed up and left last night. No warning. Nothing. But this morning I saw men at their place. Big black SUVs, guys who definitely aren't from around here. Cartel." Marcus's voice was calm, but his mind was already racing through scenarios, analyzing threats, forming plans. Sarah nodded, her hands gripping her steering wheel tightly. "That's what they're saying in town. They've been moving up from the south, buying up properties. Those who don't sell, well, they find other ways to persuade them." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Have they approached you yet?" "No, but Miller's place went last week. Same thing. Mysterious buyers, too much money to refuse. Those who stick around say they're using the farms for distribution routes." "Makes sense," Marcus said, his tactical mind mapping it out. Isolated properties, legitimate cover for vehicle traffic, storage facilities already in place, clear lines of sight for counter-surveillance. Sarah leaned out her window, lowering her voice. "Marcus, these aren't ordinary criminals. They're organized, well-funded. The sheriff's out of his depth and nobody else will stand up to them." Marcus patted the side of her truck. "Don't worry about me, Sarah. I've dealt with worse." The words came out calm, reassuring, masking the cold calculation happening behind his eyes. "Just be careful. They're targeting this valley systematically. Won't be long before they come knocking on your door." As Sarah drove away, Marcus whistled for Ghost and headed toward his barn. Inside, beneath the ordinary tools and farm equipment, lay a hidden cellar he'd installed when he first bought the property. Old paranoia, his friends had called it. Marcus called it preparation. He lifted the false floorboard, revealing a cache of equipment he'd hoped never to use again. Military-grade communications gear, weapons, tactical gear, everything he'd need if things went south. He'd spent his entire career planning for worst-case scenarios. This wouldn't be any different. His phone buzzed. A text from an old contact. "In law enforcement. Cartels moving hard and fast. 7 properties taken in the last month. Watch your back." Marcus pocketed the phone and moved to his office, pulling out detailed maps of the valley. His property sat at a crucial junction, controlling the main road and overlooking 3 different approach routes. No wonder they wanted it. Ghost's ears perked up at the sound of vehicles on the main road. Through his window, Marcus watched 3 black SUVs roll past his gate, moving slowly, too slowly, reconnaissance marking the next target. "They don't know who they're dealing with," Marcus muttered to Ghost, scratching behind the dog's ears. He spent the rest of the morning making calls to old teammates, men who'd fought beside him in places that didn't officially exist, carrying out missions that would never see the light of day. "Knife, it's Reaper. Remember that favor you owe me? Time to pay up." By afternoon, Marcus's plans were in motion. 4 of his old team members were en route: Knife Anders, their close-quarters combat specialist; Shadow Wilson, their sniper; Echo Martinez, demolitions expert; and Doc Harrison, their medic. Together, they'd face down warlords, terrorists, and armies. A cartel wouldn't know what hit them. Marcus walked his property again, this time with different eyes. Not as a farmer, but as a battlefield commander. Every hill, every tree line, every approach, they could all be used. The cartel thought they were targeting an old man's farm. Instead, they were walking into a kill zone designed by one of the most experienced special operations commanders in history. The memories came unbidden as he worked. Kandahar, 2002, their team inserting behind enemy lines to eliminate a high-value target. The Amazon, 2008, dismantling a terrorist network without leaving a trace. Operations so classified that even now, years later, they remained redacted. His farm hadn't been chosen by accident. Marcus had spent months searching for the perfect location after retirement. High ground for surveillance, natural choke points, multiple escape routes, and enough land to maintain a legitimate farming operation. He'd planned for contingencies like this, though he'd hoped never to need them. In his workshop, beneath a false wall, lay his most sophisticated security system. Cameras hidden in trees covered every approach. Motion sensors monitored the perimeter. Everything fed into a command center he'd built in his basement, a holdover from years of planning for worst-case scenarios. Ghost barked suddenly, alerting Marcus to more vehicles approaching, the same SUVs from earlier, this time stopping at his gate. Marcus straightened his back, adjusted his worn baseball cap, and prepared to play the role of a simple farmer. Let them think he was harmless. Let them underestimate him. It was a mistake they would only make once. 5 men emerged from the SUVs, their expensive suits out of place against the rugged Montana landscape. Marcus counted 2 more staying with the vehicles, hands concealed beneath jackets. Ghost growled softly beside him, but a gentle touch from Marcus kept him quiet. Ramon Ortiz led the group, his polished boots crunching on gravel as he approached. His smile was practiced, professional, but his eyes were cold as winter steel. Marcus recognized the type. Former military, probably Mexican special forces, now working for the highest bidder. "Mr. Stone?" Ramon extended his hand. "Beautiful property you have here." Marcus took it, noting the man's grip, too firm, trying to establish dominance, an amateur's tactic. "What can I do for you, gentlemen?" "We represent an investment group," Ramon said, gesturing to the valley. "We've been acquiring properties in the area, expanding operations, you might say. Your land, it has certain features that interest us." Marcus leaned against his fence. Post, the picture of relaxation. Inside, he was marking fields of fire, cataloguing weapons, noting their stances. Ex-military, at least 3 of them. The others were muscle, used to intimidating civilians. "Not interested in selling," Marcus said simply. "Land's been in my family too long." Ramon's smile tightened. "Perhaps I wasn't clear. We're prepared to offer significantly above market value, 3 million cash, more than generous for a ranch this size." Marcus scratched Ghost behind the ears, buying time to observe the 2 men by his barn. They were checking sightlines, defensive positions, not real estate investors. Advanced team mapping the property for an assault. Money's not everything, Marcus replied. Some things aren't for sale. The friendly facade cracked slightly. Ramon stepped closer, lowering his voice. Mr. Stone, let me be direct. This valley is changing. Progress, you might say. You can be part of that change and profit from it, or... Marcus's voice remained calm, even as he noted the subtle shift in the men's positions, surrounding him, standard intimidation formation. Or you might find this valley becoming very unwelcoming. Accidents happen, especially to stubborn old men who don't know when to take a good deal. Marcus spent the evening organizing his response while maintaining his cover of normalcy. He tended his cattle, checked his irrigation systems, and quietly activated a surveillance network that would make military intelligence officers envious. Ghost stayed close, sensing the change in his master's demeanor. Sarah Mitchell wasn't the only one stopping by. Bill Henderson, a Vietnam vet who ran the feed store, pulled up just before sunset. "Saw those city types at your place earlier," he said, leaning against his truck. "Same ones who visited Thompson last week before his accident." "Accident?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. Brake lines on his tractor mysteriously. "It failed. He's lucky to be alive. Signed over his property the next day." Bill's eyes held a knowing look. "Some of us remember what it was like, dealing with people who think violence is negotiation." The sun was setting, painting long shadows across the valley. Marcus studied his old friend. "How many others?" "Most of the old-timers. We see what's happening. Jenkins, Thompson, the Wilsons, all pushed out, but we're not all going quiet." Bill lowered his voice. "Some of us have been meeting, planning." Marcus nodded slowly. "Meeting where?" "Back room of my store. Tomorrow night. Might be good to have someone with your experience there." After Bill left, Marcus's phone buzzed. His surveillance system had caught more cartel vehicles entering the valley. They were establishing a pattern: reconnaissance during day, intimidation. At night, professional but predictable. In his basement command center, Marcus reviewed the valley's tactical situation. The cartel had taken 7 properties, each one strategically valuable. They were building a network of safe houses and distribution points, using legitimate farming operations as cover. His team would arrive tomorrow. Knife had already texted confirmation. He was bringing extra gear. Shadow was driving in from Idaho. Echo from Wyoming. Doc was flying into a private airstrip 2 counties over. They'd all maintained their skills since leaving service, working private security or training operations. A knock at his door interrupted his planning. It was Amy Cooper, the local veterinarian. Her hands were shaking as she handed him a folder. "Found these in my clinic's parking lot. Think they were left for me to find." Inside were photos. Her daughter at school, her husband at work, her house at night. Classic intimidation tactics. The cartel was targeting key community members, trying to break resistance before it formed. "They want access to my medical supplies," Amy explained. "Said they'd make it worth my while. When I refused..." She gestured at the photos. Marcus guided her inside, Ghost following protectively. "Tell me everything they said. Every detail matters." As Amy talked, Marcus recognized sophisticated psychological warfare techniques. The cartel wasn't just trying to take over the valley. They were systematically dismantling its social fabric, isolating potential resistance leaders. "You're not alone in this," Marcus assured her. "Things are already in motion." After Amy left, Marcus made another call. "Control, this is Reaper. Remember that back door you kept into the NSA database? Time to repay that favor. Need everything. You have on Los Zetas operations in Montana." His old CIA contact's response was immediate. "Jesus, Reaper, those guys are heavy hitters. Paramilitaries disguised as a cartel. You sure you want to poke that hornet's nest?" "They're threatening my community," Marcus replied. "They just don't know they're threatening the wrong community." By nightfall, more neighbors had visited, each brought similar stories: threats, intimidation, mysterious accidents. The cartel was moving faster now, trying to secure the valley before organized resistance could form. They didn't realize their aggressive timeline was actually working against them. Every threat, every act of intimidation pushed more people toward resistance. The valley's residents weren't just farmers and ranchers, they were descendants of pioneers, people who understood that sometimes you had to fight to keep what was yours. Marcus sent one final text to his team. Situation escalating, valley becoming active war zone, bring everything. The cartel made their move at midnight. Marcus was ready, having spotted their advance team 2 hours earlier through his thermal imaging system. 3 SUVs approached his farm from different directions, trying to surround the property. Amateur. Move. They'd just split their forces. Ghost lay silent beside him, trained not to bark at moments like this. Through his night vision scope, Marcus counted 12 men. Professional gear, military-style movements. These weren't ordinary cartel thugs. Time to remind them why they called me Reaper, Marcus whispered to Ghost, adjusting his position in the darkness of his front porch. He'd positioned himself to appear vulnerable while maintaining clear fields of fire. The SUVs stopped just short of his gate. Ramon emerged first, flanked by 6 men carrying submachine guns poorly concealed under jackets. The others maintained distance, setting up a perimeter. Their tactics were solid, but they were preparing for the wrong kind of fight. "Mr. Stone," Ramon called out, "we thought we might continue our conversation." Marcus flicked on his porch light, appearing startled and old. "Kind of late for business talks, isn't it?" "Business doesn't sleep," Ramon smiled, but his eyes were cold. "Have you reconsidered our offer? Still not selling?" Marcus made a show of squinting into the darkness. "Those your friends carrying guns? Seems unnecessary for a real estate deal." Ramon's smile vanished. "Last chance, old man. Sign the papers, take the money, everybody stays healthy. Fight us." And he snapped his fingers. One of his men fired a burst into Marcus's tractor, destroying the engine block. Another shot out his truck's tires. Standard intimidation. Destroy the target's ability to work their land. They weren't watching Ghost. At Marcus's subtle hand signal, the shepherd slipped away into the shadows. 5 seconds later, gunfire erupted from the tree line. Just warning shots, but precisely placed. The cartel members dove for cover, suddenly realizing they were exposed. "That's my counteroffer," Marcus said calmly, not moving from his rocking chair. "Leave now. Forget about my farm, and everybody stays healthy. Stay." He shrugged. "Well, let's just say I've got friends too. Better trained ones." Ramon snarled something in Spanish. 3 of his men began advancing toward the porch, weapons raised. They never saw the tripwires. Non-lethal flashbangs detonated, followed by smoke grenades. In the confusion, Ghost attacked, taking down one gunman by the arm. Marcus moved like lightning, decades of close-quarter combat training taking over. The first attacker went down to a throat strike, his weapon clattering away. The second managed to squeeze off a shot that went wide before Marcus dislocated his shoulder and swept his legs. The third found himself disarmed and unconscious before he realized the old farmer had moved. Ramon's remaining men opened fire, but Marcus was already gone, Ghost at his heels. They shot at shadows while Marcus circled behind them. More flashbangs detonated from different positions, creating the illusion of multiple defenders. "Fall back!" Ramon screamed, realizing they'd lost control of the situation. His men retreated to their vehicles, dragging their wounded. They tried to maintain tactical formation, but their training was cracking under the assault from an enemy they couldn't see. "Remember this," Marcus called out as they fled. "Next time won't be a warning." As the SUVs peeled away, Marcus surveyed the damage. His tractor was destroyed, his truck disabled, but he'd achieved his objective. The cartel had just learned that at least one farmer wouldn't be intimidated. He collected the weapons dropped by the unconscious attackers, adding them to his arsenal. Then he made a call. "Knife, Situations changed. They just made their first move. Time to accelerate our timeline. Dawn revealed the full scope of the night's violence. Marcus's front yard looked like a war zone, shell casings glinting in the morning light, his tractor riddled with bullets, deep tire tracks torn through his wheat field. But appearances could be deceiving. Every point of damage was calculated, each sign of conflict precisely where he wanted it. Sheriff Tom Cooper arrived first, lights flashing. Jesus, Marcus. Dispatch said there was gunfire, but this... He gestured at the destruction. What happened? Had some visitors, Marcus replied calmly, ghost alert at his side. Real estate discussion got heated. The sheriff knelt to examine a shell casing. This is military-grade ammunition. These weren't ordinary thugs. No, Marcus agreed, they weren't. He handed Cooper a flash drive. Security camera footage. Faces, vehicles, everything you need to identify them. Cooper pocketed the drive, his expression grim. You know this isn't over. They'll come back stronger next time. Count on it. Marcus smiled slightly. But they'll find things different when they do. His phone buzzed. Knife's encrypted message. Team assembled. ETA 6 hours. Shadow already in position on North Ridge. Marcus had spent the rest of the night preparing. His security system now covered the entire valley, not just his farm. Motion, sensors, hidden cameras, and tactical observation posts created an early warning network that would make Pentagon planners envious. Sarah Mitchell arrived as the sheriff was leaving. Her face went pale at the destruction. My God, Marcus, we heard explosions, but... She paused, noticing something odd. Why are you smiling? Because now we know what we're dealing with, he replied, and they've shown their hand too early. Inside his command center, Marcus reviewed the night's footage. The cartel team's tactics revealed their training, their weaknesses, and most importantly, their level of preparation. They hadn't expected serious resistance. That misconception would cost them. His CIA contact called with updates. Facial recognition confirmed 3 of them. Ex-Mexican special forces now working as cartel enforcers. They've done this before, taking over rural areas, setting up distribution networks. But they've never failed. First time for everything, Marcus replied, studying satellite imagery of the valley. What else? They're calling in reinforcements, serious ones, professional contractors, military gear. They're treating this like a full tactical operation now. Good. Marcus's voice was cold. Let them bring their best. Saves us having to hunt them down later. The morning brought more visitors. Bill Henderson arrived with 5 other veterans, all carrying rifles. Heard the fighting, Bill said. We're not letting you stand alone. Marcus nodded, recognizing the determination in their eyes. These men might be older, but they remembered how to fight. Got a better idea. Time to organize something more formal. By noon, his barn had become a command center. Bill's veterans, all with combat experience from Vietnam to Desert Storm, gathered around maps of the valley. Marcus began outlining his plan, not just for defending individual farms, but for turning the entire valley into a fortress. They think they're fighting one old farmer, he explained. Time to show them they're fighting an entire community. His phone buzzed again. Echo reporting in. Brought the special equipment you requested. Enough to wire the whole valley. Just say where you want it. Marcus sent back coordinates. Everything was falling into place. The cartel had started this thinking. They were the hunters. They were about to learn what it meant to become the hunted. Sir, one of Bill's men called out, monitoring the surveillance feeds. Multiple vehicles, entering the valley from the south. Heavy weapons visible. Let them come, Marcus replied, checking his weapons. The trap's already set. Marcus's team arrived like ordinary travelers. Knife in a battered pickup truck loaded with farming equipment. Echo driving a construction vehicle. Doc in an old Suburban with medical supplies. Only Shadow was already in position, having slipped into the valley unseen during the night. To anyone watching, they looked like typical rural visitors. That was the point. They gathered in Marcus's reinforced barn, 20 years melting away as the old team assembled. Knife, real name James Anders, carried his rifle case like it was part of him. Echo, Miguel Martinez, brought enough explosives to level a small town, all carefully concealed in construction equipment cases. Doc Harrison's medical kit was upgraded but familiar. He'd patched them up through worse situations than this. "Just like old times," Knife said, his voice gruff, but warm, though usually we had government backing. "Government would just slow us down," Echo replied, already examining the barn's structure. "Nice setup, boss. Good sight lines, multiple escape routes. You weren't kidding about being ready." Marcus spread a detailed map across his workbench. "Cartel's been systematic, taking key properties, establishing distribution routes. They're not just running drugs, they're setting up a permanent operation." Shadow appeared silently in the doorway, his ghillie suit still covered in local vegetation. Counted 3 more vehicles entering the valley. Heavy weapons, professional. Crews. These aren't street thugs. "What's our opposition looking like?" Knife asked, cleaning his rifle with practiced precision. "Main force is 30 men." Marcus pointed to marked locations. 2 separate groups. First team's the muscle. They handle intimidation, arson, accidents. Second team's their professionals. Actual combat experience, proper tactical training. Doc examined the terrain through the barn door. "Kill zones are perfect. Natural bottleneck. Here, high ground advantage. We can funnel them right where we want them." "They'll come in force," Marcus warned. "No more pretense of being businessmen. Heavy weapons, armor, probably air support." "Good." Echo grinned, pulling out his demolition plans. "Been a while since we had a proper fight." Marcus's expression turned serious. "This isn't just about holding them off. We end this permanently. Not just here, we shut down their entire operation in the valley." The team sobered, recognizing the tone. It was the voice that had led them through impossible missions, that had brought them all home alive when the odds said otherwise. "Why'd you really come?" Marcus asked, looking at each man. "You could have stayed retired, stayed safe." Doc spoke first, his medical bag open beside him. "Remember Kosovo? That village we found after the militia went through? Some things you can't walk away from. Some fights need fighting. Cartel took my cousin's farm in Texas," Echo added, checking detonator wires. "By the time anyone could do anything, it was too late. Not happening again, not here." Shadow just shrugged, but his eyes were hard. "You called. That's enough." Marcus nodded, then activated his tactical display. "Latest intel shows they're moving. Faster than we thought. Main force mobilizing for tonight, no warning, no negotiation. They're coming to take the farm and send a message." "Perfect." Knife smiled grimly. "Let's give them a message of our own." They spent the next hour coordinating their defense. Echo rigged the main road with explosives that could flip an armored vehicle. Shadow set up 3 different sniper nests, each covering a different approach. Doc established a medical station in the basement, linking their communications and surveillance. "Remember Kandahar?" Knife asked as they worked. "That night raid that went sideways when the whole city lit up?" "Never saw so much firepower in my life," Echo chuckled. "Until Wade called an audible," Doc added. "Turned their own defenses against them. Still don't know how you knew that would work." "Simple," Marcus said, checking ammunition stores. "People get predictable when they think they have the advantage. Cartel's the same way. They're used to civilians, used to easy victories. They won't be ready for what's coming." The team dispersed across the valley, each taking position under carefully crafted covers. Shadow became a wildlife photographer, his sniper's nest disguised as a bird-watching platform. Echo posed as a construction contractor, surveying properties for structural improvements. Doc opened a temporary clinic in town, giving him perfect cover to monitor cartel movements while providing actual medical care. Knife took the most direct approach, opening an impromptu firearms training course at Bill Henderson's ranch. Basic home defense, he called it, but he was teaching combat tactics to farmers who'd never held anything more dangerous than a hunting rifle. Marcus coordinated everything from his farm, using his agricultural delivery routes to distribute supplies and intelligence. Every hay delivery contained encrypted communications equipment. Every seed exchange included surveillance gear. The valley was becoming an invisible fortress. "They're watching the main roads," Shadow reported over their secure channel. 3 observation posts, professional setup, but they're ignoring the logging trails. "Typical urban thinking," Marcus replied. "They don't understand rural terrain." "Echo, how's the welcome package coming?" "Got something special planned for their next convoy," Echo chuckled. "They'll think twice about using those roads again." The local community was transforming too. Sarah Mitchell's teenage sons were now running routine farm equipment along carefully planned routes, creating a mobile surveillance network. Bill Henderson's feed store became an intelligence hub, farmers sharing information about unusual vehicles or suspicious activities. Doc's clinic proved invaluable. "Cartels bringing in more muscle," he reported during their evening briefing. "Treated 3 locals today with accident injuries. They're escalating their intimidation tactics." "They're getting frustrated," Knife added. "Expected to have control of the valley by now, making mistakes." Marcus studied their tactical display, updated with the day's intelligence. The cartel's operation was sophisticated but predictable. They were using standard urban warfare tactics, trying to control key infrastructure and isolate potential resistance. But they didn't understand what they were really fighting. "Sir," young Tommy Henderson called over the radio, using the farm emergency channel they'd established. "Got 3 SUVs heading toward Mitchell's place. Look like the ones from last night." "Copy that," Marcus replied. "Everyone maintain normal activities. Let's see how they like our new security upgrades." The cartel convoy hit Echo's first surprise within minutes, a carefully concealed spike strip that seemed to appear from nowhere. As they stopped to check their tires, Shadow's cameras captured clear images of their faces and weapons. "Evidence building for later. They're adapting," Knife observed, "using better tactics, keeping lookouts, getting more professional." "Good," Marcus said. "Professionals are predictable, and predictable means vulnerable." The afternoon brought more developments. Amy Cooper arrived at Doc's clinic, warning that cartel members had been asking about medical supplies. "They think I'm just a vet," she said. "Don't realize I've been cataloging every suspicious injury in the valley." Marcus saw an opportunity. "Think you could start requiring ID for certain treatments? Get names and photos?" Amy smiled grimly. "Already am. Been sending everything to that secure server you set up." By evening, the team had established a complete surveillance network, motion sensors hidden in fence posts, cameras disguised as birdhouses. Every approach to every farm was monitored, every cartel movement tracked. "They're planning something big," Shadow reported. "Spotted them unloading heavy weapons at the old Miller place. Professional gear, military grade." "Let them come," Marcus replied. "Every piece of equipment they bring is another piece of evidence. Every man they send is another target." The valley had become more than just a battleground. It was a community finding its strength, farmers and ranchers discovering they weren't helpless against the cartel's intimidation. They were becoming something the cartel had never faced before, an organized, coordinated resistance that knew every inch of terrain. "Remember," Marcus told his team during their final briefing, "we're not just fighting for my farm. We're fighting for every family in this valley, every person these bastards would victimize. We do this right, we do it clean, and we do it permanent." The cartel made their first major push at dawn. 20 vehicles, split into 3 groups, converging on Marcus's farm from different directions. They'd learned from their last failure, approaching with proper tactical formation and overwhelming force. "Right on schedule," Marcus muttered, watching through his command center displays. Every approach was covered, every contingency planned for. All units execute pattern Alpha. The response began subtly. Sarah Mitchell's tractors broke down on 2 access roads, blocking the cartel's planned routes. Bill Henderson's cattle mysteriously got loose, forcing another group to detour. Each small obstacle channeled the cartel forces exactly where the team wanted them. "Lead group approaching first checkpoint," Shadow reported from his hide. "Nice mix of military contractors and cartel muscle. Someone spent some serious money on this operation. They're about to learn an expensive lesson," Echo replied, initiating welcome package in 3, 2, 1. The lead vehicle hit his first surprise. Not an explosion, but a perfectly timed irrigation release that turned the road into a mud pit. As they struggled to maintain control, secondary charges detonated smoke screens, killing visibility. "What the hell?" Ramon's voice crackled over their monitored radio channel. "Since when do farmers have tactical deployments?" The cartel forces tried to maintain formation, but every move met another obstacle. Knife's civilian defense teams, positioned in concealed spots throughout the valley, began picking off vehicle tires with careful shots. Not lethal force, just mechanical disruption. "Second group splitting off," Doc reported from his observation post, trying to circle wide around the Henderson place. "Let them," Marcus commanded. "Tommy, you're up." Young Tommy Henderson, who'd spent the last week learning basic drone operations, launched his father's crop monitoring UAV. The aerial footage of armed men would make excellent evidence for law enforcement. The cartel's professional contractors recognized the trap too late. Every route they took had been prepared, every tactical option predicted and countered. When they tried to retreat, they found their escape routes blocked by legitimate farm activity. Hay deliveries, cattle drives, routine traffic that couldn't possibly be coordinated resistance. "Sir," Shadow's voice carried a note of admiration, "they're starting to panic. These aren't random farmers anymore. They're facing an organized defense network." Ramon's frustration exploded over their comms. "Who are these people? This isn't—" "Impossible." Marcus keyed his radio, broadcasting on their frequency. "Last warning, leave the valley. Tell your bosses this territory is no longer available." The response was predictable. Increased aggression. 3 cartel vehicles broke formation, charging toward Marcus's farm. They made it within 500 yards before Echo's synchronized charges lifted the road beneath them, disabling their engines without risking lives. "Getting sloppy," Knife observed, "abandoning tactical doctrine, reacting emotionally. Classic signs of command structure breaking down." The cartel forces began a disorganized retreat, their carefully planned operation in shambles. As they withdrew, Doc's clinic received 3 emergency patients, cartel soldiers claiming farming accidents while actually scouting the town's defenses. "Got names, photos, and fingerprints," Doc reported. "Amy's sending everything to the FBI database. These boys are going to have some explaining to do." By noon, the valley had won its first major engagement without firing a lethal shot. The cartel's attempt at overwhelming force had been systematically dismantled by farmers and ranchers working in perfect coordination with military precision. "They'll be back," Shadow warned during the after-action briefing. "Next time with better intel, heavier weapons." "Count on it," Marcus agreed. "But now they know they're not fighting civilians anymore. They're fighting an entire community that's learned to defend itself, and that's something their tactical manuals don't cover." The victory brought unexpected benefits. More locals stepped forward, offering resources and support. The valley wasn't just resisting. It was transforming into something the cartel had never encountered. a civilian population with military-grade defensive capabilities and the will to use them. "Remember," Marcus told his team as they prepared, "for the inevitable counterattack, we're not just teaching them to fight, we're teaching them to win." The cartel's response came 3 days later, and it was brutal. They abandoned pretense, launching coordinated attacks across the valley. Marcus watched from his command center as multiple alerts lit up his tactical display. "Fire at the Mitchell Place," Shadow reported urgently. "Professional incendiary devices. They're trying to burn them out." "Henderson's feed store under attack," Knife added. 2 teams, military-style assault pattern. Multiple explosions at the Cooper Veterinary Clinic." Doc's voice was tight. "They're targeting our support network." Marcus's mind raced through scenarios, calculating responses. The cartel had learned from their earlier failures. Instead of concentrated force, they were striking everywhere at once, trying to overwhelm the valley's defensive network. "All units, execute scatter protocol," Marcus commanded. "Echo, initiate countermeasures. Doc, get emergency teams moving." Shadow, weapons free on vehicle targets only. The valley's response was immediate. Fire suppression systems, installed under the guise of agricultural equipment, activated at the Mitchell farm. Sarah's teenage sons, now trained in emergency protocols, implemented their evacuation plan flawlessly. At Henderson's store, Knife's civilian defense teams demonstrated their training. The cartel attackers found themselves facing coordinated resistance from multiple angles, their assault stalling against prepared positions. 4 hostiles down, Knife reported. Non-lethal takedowns. Bill's people are holding their own. Echo's voice crackled over the comm. Convoy intercepted on Route 12. They're using armor now, technical vehicles with mounted weapons. "Show them why that was a mistake," Marcus ordered. "Precisely placed charges, hidden during routine road maintenance. Disabled the convoy's lead and rear vehicles. Trapped in a kill zone, the cartel forces found themselves exposed to fire from Shadow's multiple sniper positions." "Asset secured," Shadow confirmed. 3 50 cals captured intact. "These aren't cartel-grade weapons. Someone supplying them military hardware." The night lit up with combat. The cartel had brought overwhelming force, but the valley's defenders had preparation and coordination. Every attack met prepared resistance. Every tactical advantage countered by intimate knowledge of the terrain. "Marcus," Sarah's voice cut through the chaos. "They're at my north pasture. Got at least 12 men with demo charges, heading for the irrigation station." "Copy that. Tommy, deploy surveillance drones. Doc, get your team to the Mitchell farm. Shadow, shift fire to protect that approach." The irrigation station was critical. Infrastructure, controlling water flow to half the valley's farms. The cartel was trying to force submission through drought, a tactic that showed they still didn't understand who they were fighting. Marcus keyed his radio to the cartel's frequency. "You boys really should have researched who lives in this valley." Burst of Spanish profanity answered him, followed by Ramon's voice. "You can't protect everyone, old man. We'll burn it all down if we have to." Look up. Powerful lights suddenly illuminated the irrigation station team. Lights mounted on combine harvesters and tractors, positioned days ago for exactly this purpose. The cartel forces found themselves caught in multiple crossing fields of fire, their night vision equipment worse than useless. 60 seconds to surrender, Marcus broadcast. After that, we stop being nice. The irrigation station team, professional enough to recognize an impossible position, chose wisely. Within minutes, Doc's team was collecting weapons and zip-tying prisoners. But the victory brought sobering news. "Marcus," Doc called in, his voice grim, "found orders on their commander. This was just the first wave. They've got reinforcements coming, serious ones. Professional contractors, heavy weapons, even air support." "Good," Marcus replied, studying his tactical display. "Let them come. Every escalation makes our case stronger. Shadow, tell me you got everything on video." Multiple angles, sir. Drone footage, ground cameras, thermal imaging, clear evidence of military-grade weapons and coordinated assault teams. FBI's going to have a field day with this. The night's battle had changed the conflict's nature. The cartel had shown their true face, abandoning any pretense of legitimate business. In doing so, they'd given Marcus's team exactly what they needed: documented proof of a military-style assault on American soil. All units, Marcus commanded. Initiate Phase 2. Time to show them what a real military response looks like. The full moon cast long shadows across Marcus's farm as his team prepared for what was coming. Intelligence confirmed their worst fears. The cartel was bringing in their elite forces, professional killers with military training and advanced equipment. Latest satellite pass shows multiple convoys heading our way, Shadow reported, studying thermal imaging feeds. At least 40 vehicles. They're not even trying to hide anymore. Echo worked methodically, transforming the valley into a defensive masterpiece. Every road concealed sophisticated IEDs, every approach covered by interlocking fields of fire. The farm equipment graveyard became a maze of tank traps and sniper positions. Got confirmation on their reinforcements, Doc announced during the midnight briefing. Former Mexican Special Forces, Colombian mercenaries, even some Eastern European contractors. They're bringing serious hardware too: armed drones, night vision equipment, even light-armored vehicles. Marcus studied the tactical display, his mind calculating angles and approaches. They think overwhelming force is the answer. That's good. Means they still don't understand what they're really fighting. Knife's civilian defense teams had evolved beyond basic training. Local veterans taught younger farmers military hand signals and small unit tactics. Every barn became a hardened position, every silo an observation post. "Check this out," Tommy Henderson called over the radio. His drone footage showed cartel advance teams marking targets, not just farms, but power stations, water supplies, communications towers. They were planning to isolate the valley completely. "Let them think they have the initiative," Marcus ordered. "Echo, show me what you've prepared for their infrastructure attack." Echo's grin was audible in his voice. "Remember those agricultural sensors we've been planting? Each one's got a surprise package. They touch our infrastructure, they lose theirs. Already got their command frequencies mapped." The valley's transformation was almost complete. On the surface, everything looked normal. Farmers tending crops, ranchers moving cattle. But beneath that peaceful facade lay a sophisticated military defense network. "Got movement," Shadow reported suddenly. 3 helicopters, coming in low from the south. Looked like gunships. "Right on schedule," Marcus replied. "Doc, is the hospital ready? Converting the old grain warehouse now. Full surgical suite, trauma equipment, everything we need. Amy's been pulling in medical supplies through her vet contacts." The night deepened as Marcus walked his perimeter one last time. Every step confirmed another piece of their preparation. Motion sensors hidden in irrigation pipes. Thermal cameras disguised as weather stations. The valley wasn't just defended, it was a carefully crafted trap. "Remember Kosovo?" Knife asked, joining him on patrol. "That time we turned an entire village into a defensive position?" "This is different," Marcus replied. "These people aren't just surviving, they're fighting for their homes. That makes them more dangerous than any mercenary." Sarah Mitchell arrived with final intelligence. "Cartel's been asking questions in town. They know something's wrong. Can't figure out why their teams keep disappearing. But they're still underestimating us, thinking we're just well-armed farmers." Marcus smiled grimly. "That's their final mistake. They're bringing their best fighters to what they think is a simple rural operation. Instead, they're walking into a prepared defensive position held by experienced special operations veterans and highly motivated locals. The team gathered for one last briefing before dawn. Each member had transformed their section of the valley into a specialized killing ground. Shadow's multiple sniper nests covered every approach. Echo's demolitions were planted precisely where the enemy would have to move. Doc's medical network could respond to any location within minutes. "Sir," Tommy's voice crackled over the radio. "Got visual confirmation. Lead elements of their main force are staging just outside the valley. Multiple heavy weapons teams, professional. Combat units, they're executing local cartel members who failed before. Sending a message," Knife observed. "New leadership taking control. These won't be amateurs." "Good," Marcus replied, checking his weapons. "Means they'll understand exactly what's happening when it all falls apart. All units, final positions. Remember, we're not just defending farms anymore. We're sending a message that will echo through every cartel organization in North America." The sea. Harvest moon hung full and bright, illuminating the valley like a spotlight. Somewhere out there, professional killers were preparing to assault what they thought was an unusually stubborn farming community. They had no idea they were about to face one of the most sophisticated defensive operations ever conceived. "Dawn's in 3 hours," Marcus announced. "That's when they'll come. Everyone knows their positions, everyone knows their roles. Let them think they have the advantage. Let them commit fully to the attack." He paused, looking at each team member. "Then we show them why you don't threaten a Delta Force commander's home." The first sign of betrayal came from an unexpected source. Amy Cooper burst into Marcus's command center just before midnight, her face pale with shock. "The medical board inspector, he's cartel." Marcus's mind instantly shifted to combat mode. "Explain." He was asking about Doc's credentials, but the questions were wrong, too specific about trauma treatment, combat injuries. Then I saw him photographing our supply manifests. She handed Marcus her phone. "I ran his picture through that database. You gave me his former Mexican intelligence. Shadow," Marcus keyed his radio. "Status on medical inspector. Target left clinic 20 minutes ago, moving toward moving toward our southern defense line." The implications hit like a thunderbolt. The cartel hadn't just infiltrated the valley, they'd planted professionals to map their defenses. Marcus quickly reviewed security footage, noting patterns he'd missed before. "Sir," Tommy's voice crackled urgently, "got multiple heat signatures at the old Miller barn. They're moving equipment, night vision, radio gear. The new farm hands," Knife cut in, "the ones Miller hired last week. They're not just scouts." Marcus's tactical display suddenly looked different. Small anomalies became clear patterns. The cartel had pieced together their defensive network, not through direct observation, but through carefully placed infiltrators. "All units, implement blackout protocol," Marcus ordered. "They've compromised our outer perimeter. Switch to backup. Frequencies, alternate positions." But the cartel's intelligence operation went deeper than they'd suspected. 3 local businesses, supposedly bought by out-of-state investors, were actually cartel fronts. They'd been using legitimate cover to stockpile weapons and gather. "Intelligence, Marcus." Sarah's voice was tight with controlled fear. "Remember those surveyors last week? They weren't measuring property lines. They were mapping our surveillance network." The team gathered quickly, adapting their plans. The cartel's infiltration meant their carefully prepared defenses were compromised, but it also presented an opportunity. "They think they know our capabilities," Marcus explained, updating their tactical display. "That makes them predictable. Echo, time to implement contingency Delta." Echo grinned. "You mean the false defense line, the one we wanted them to find?" Marcus nodded grimly. For every real defensive position, they'd created a decoy, obvious enough to be discovered, strong enough to be believable. The cartel's intelligence operation had mapped exactly what they wanted them to find. "New problem," Shadow reported. "County maintenance crew at the North Bridge. Except they're using military hand signals." "How long have they been watching us?" Doc wondered, reviewing medical records for other potential infiltrators. "Long enough to think they know what they're dealing with," Marcus replied. "Not long," Enough to understand why that's dangerous. The team quickly shifted to their alternate strategy. Every fallback position became a primary defense point. Every discovered surveillance post became a trap. They weren't just fighting cartel soldiers anymore. They were engaged in a complex counterintelligence operation. "Sir," Tommy called in, his voice excited. "They took the bait. Drone footage shows their advanced teams moving exactly where Echo predicted." Marcus allowed himself a small smile. The cartel's infiltrators had done their job perfectly. Too perfectly. They'd reported exactly what Marcus's team had wanted them to find, building a picture of defense capabilities that was elaborate, professional, and completely misleading. "All units, prepare for Phase 3, Marcus commanded. "They think they've compromised our defense. Time to show them why you don't try to outsmart Delta Force." The harvest moon cast long shadows as the team prepared. Their real defensive positions, somewhere out there, cartel commanders were planning their assault based on detailed intelligence. Intelligence that would lead them straight into the deadliest trap of all, the one they thought they'd already discovered and avoided. "Remember," Marcus told his team, "sometimes the best defense isn't the one you hide. It's the one you let them think they've found." Dawn revealed the true genius of Marcus's counterintelligence operation. Every compromised position had become a trap, every discovered defense point a deception. The cartel's infiltrators had unknowingly helped create the perfect killing ground. There, advanced teams are moving exactly as predicted, Shadow reported from his new hide. Following the routes their intelligence gathered, avoiding the defenses they discovered. Marcus watched through his command center displays as the cartel forces moved with professional precision, completely confident in their tactical advantage. They were executing a perfect assault plan against a defense that didn't actually exist. Echo, status on the special packages. "All in place, boss. Every weak point they identified is rigged. They'll think they're exploiting gaps in our defense. Right until the moment it all goes wrong." The valley's transformation was complete, but not in the way the cartel's intelligence suggested. Local farmers had become expert actors, maintaining their daily routines while concealing sophisticated military operations. Every tractor movement was a signal, every field worker a trained observer. "Got their command element," Knife reported. "Using the old fire station just like we leaked. Think they're safe behind all that concrete." Marcus allowed himself a grim smile. The fire station had been their own suggestion, carefully planted through their discovered communications network. Its thick walls would trap the cartel's leadership exactly where the team wanted them. Sarah's voice crackled over the secure channel. "Marcus, they're moving civilian vehicles through town, using our own people as cover." Right into the kill box. Marcus confirmed, "All units execute Thunder Protocol." The valley erupted in coordinated chaos. Farm equipment broke down at strategic points, forcing the cartel's civilian convoy to detour. Each detour led them further into prepared positions, guided by their own intelligence about safe routes. "Sir," Tommy called excitedly, "their helicopter support is setting up exactly where we predicted. They think they've found our blind spot. Shadow. Got 3 clean shots whenever you give the word. They'll never know what hit them." The cartel's main force advanced with textbook precision, avoiding every marked defense point, exploiting every apparent weakness. Their infiltrators had done their jobs perfectly, mapping out a defensive network that existed solely to be discovered. "Remember, Kosovo?" Doc asked during a brief communication check. "How we let them think they'd found our medical evacuation routes?" "Same principle," Marcus replied. "People trust their own intelligence more than their eyes. They'll follow their maps right into our real defense line." The morning progressed exactly as planned. Cartel forces moved confidently through the valley, their commanders certain they had complete tactical understanding of the situation. Each move was perfect, professional, and perfectly predictable. "All units," Marcus commanded, "prepare for Phase 4, let them think they're winning right until the moment they lose." The valley held its breath as the trap prepared to spring. Farmers watched from their fields, each one knowing their role in what was coming. The cartel had spent weeks gathering intelligence, planting infiltrators, mapping defenses. They'd created a complete picture of their opposition. It was exactly the picture Marcus had wanted them to see. "Remember," he told his team, "the best trap isn't the one they don't see coming, it's the one they think they've already beaten." The harvest moon faded as morning light filled the valley. Somewhere out there, cartel commanders were confidently executing their assault plan, certain they had outsmarted a bunch of farmers and worn out soldiers. They were about to learn why Marcus's team had been the most feared special operations unit in Delta Force history. The valley grew quiet as sunset approached. Too quiet. The usual evening sounds of farm life, tractors returning, cattle being brought in, dogs barking, had all ceased. Even the birds seemed to sense what was coming. "Final count," Shadow reported. From his hidden position, 60-plus combat personnel, 8 armored vehicles, 3 helicopter gunships staging at their forward base, plus about 40 local cartel muscle for support. Marcus studied the tactical display, watching red dots position themselves exactly where his team had planned. The cartel forces were executing a textbook operation, spreading out to attack from multiple directions simultaneously. "They're deploying their elite teams," Knife observed. "Former Mexican Special Forces units taking point. These guys are good. Using proper tactical spacing, maintaining communications discipline. Good." Marcus checked his weapons. "Professionals follow patterns. Patterns make them predictable." Echo's voice crackled over the secure channel. "Boss, you're gonna love this. They're positioning their command and control exactly where we wanted. That intelligence about our radio dead zones worked perfectly." The cartel's confidence was evident in their movements. Their infiltrators had provided detailed maps of the valley's defenses, marking every surveillance point, every prepared position, every fallback location. All of them carefully crafted deceptions. "Tommy, status on the civilian. Population. Everyone's clear of the target zones," the young man reported. "Following the evacuation plan exactly like you taught us. Sheriff Cooper's got the town locked down tight," Doc called in from his position. "Medical teams are ready. Triage points established at all the locations we let them discover. They'll be expecting us to move casualties there." Marcus allowed himself a grim smile. The cartel's intelligence operation had been thorough, professional, and completely deceived. They thought they were attacking a sophisticated but ultimately amateur defensive position. Instead, they were walking into something far more dangerous. "Sir," Sarah's voice was tight with tension, "their advanced teams are starting to move. Using those approach routes we leaked through the compromised communications. Right on schedule," Marcus replied. "All units, confirm final positions." The acknowledgements came in quick succession. "Shadow, in position. All sniper nests covered. Knife here. Civilian defense teams ready. Echo, charges armed and waiting. Doc, medical response prepared." The cartel forces moved with practiced precision, their night vision equipment giving them confidence in the darkness. They had no way of knowing that every piece of intelligence they'd gathered had been carefully crafted to bring them to this moment. "Remember," Marcus broadcast to his team, "they're expecting farmers with military training. Show them what happens when they actually face Delta Force." The harvest moon rose over the valley, casting long shadows that concealed the final elements of their trap. Marcus watched through his tactical display as the cartel forces positioned themselves perfectly. "All units prepare for Phase 5, he commanded. "Once this starts, we don't stop until it's done." Ghost lay silently at Marcus's feet, the German shepherd's ears alert to approaching danger. Years of combat experience had taught them both to sense when violence was imminent. "Sir," Tommy's voice carried barely contained excitement, "their command unit is transmitting final assault orders. They're They're actually believing all of it, every piece of intel we fed them. Marcus checked his weapons one final time. Somewhere out there, cartel commanders were confidently briefing their professional assault teams, certain they had complete tactical superiority. They were about to learn the difference between gathering intelligence and understanding it. Remember, Kosovo, he told his team quietly. Sometimes the easiest way to defeat an enemy is to let them think they've already won. The cartel's attack began at midnight, exactly as Marcus had predicted. Their first move was to take out what they thought was the valley's communications network, a decoy system Echo had spent days making obvious to their surveillance. They just hit the fake relay station, Shadow reported quietly. Using suppressors, professional infiltration techniques, these guys know their business. Good. Marcus watched through his thermal imaging as the cartel's elite teams moved into position. Let them think they've blinded us. Echo, status? Main force is approaching the weak points in our southern perimeter. Walking right into it, boss. Give me the word. Marcus waited, watching the cartel forces commit fully to their assault plan. Their confidence was evident in their movements, quick, precise, professional. They thought they were executing a perfect operation against an amateur defense. Sir, Tommy whispered over the secure channel, their helicopter gunships are lifting off, moving to those staging points we leaked. Shadow? Got all three in my sights, waiting for them to reach the sweet spot. The cartel commanders had positioned their forces exactly according to the intelligence they'd gathered, spreading out to exploit every weakness they thought they'd discovered, carefully avoiding every defense they believed they'd mapped. Movement. At the old fire station, Knife reported. Their command element is setting up, got at least 20 men establishing a security perimeter. Marcus checked his tactical display one final time. The cartel forces had taken every piece of bait, followed every false trail, positioned themselves precisely where his team had planned. Now came the moment of truth. All units, he broadcast on their real communications network, execute Thunderstrike. The valley erupted in synchronized chaos. Shadow's first shots didn't target the helicopters. Instead, he disabled their landing zones with precisely placed explosives, forcing them to hover and burn fuel. Echo's charges detonated in sequence, not where the cartel expected defenses, but in the areas they thought were safe. What the hell? The cartel commander's voice crackled over their monitored channel. These aren't the defensive positions we mapped. Sir, one of their tactical team leaders cut in. We've got multiple new firing positions, nothing like the intel showed. Marcus keyed his radio. Welcome to Delta Force Tactical Deception, gentlemen. You've just walked into a kill zone 20 years in the making. The cartel's professional soldiers reacted quickly, attempting to fall back to their secondary positions. But those positions had been chosen for them through carefully leaked intelligence. And each one was covered by multiple pre-sighted weapons. They're trying to rally at the Miller barn, Shadow reported with grim satisfaction. Right where we wanted them. Knife, your teams are up. The civilian defense forces positioned in hidden bunkers throughout the valley opened fire simultaneously. Not trying to kill, but pinning the cartel forces in place with carefully coordinated shots. Their helicopters are getting nervous, Tommy reported, watching through his drone feeds. Fuel's going to be a concern soon. Let them worry, Marcus replied. Phase 2 on my mark. The cartel commanders were realizing too late the magnitude of their mistake. Every position they thought was secure had become a trap. Every route they'd carefully scouted led to prepared killing zones. Their own intelligence, gathered so professionally, had betrayed them. Boss, Echo's voice carried a note of professional admiration. They're starting to understand. Their tactics are changing, becoming defensive. Too late, Marcus answered, watching the trap close. They've already committed their forces exactly where we want them. All units, prepare for Phase 2. Let's show them why Delta Force specialized in asymmetric warfare. The harvest moon cast long shadows across the valley as Marcus's team prepared to spring the main trap. Somewhere out there, cartel commanders were desperately trying to understand how their perfect intelligence had led them to disaster. They were about to learn that in special operations, sometimes the best intelligence is the kind your enemy wants you to find. The traps snapped shut with devastating precision. As the cartel forces scrambled to respond to the initial attacks, Marcus initiated Phase 2, the real operation they'd spent weeks preparing for. "All units, execute Rolling Thunder," he commanded. The valley's transformation was instant and overwhelming. Irrigation pipes that the cartel had carefully mapped as water systems began spewing thick smoke, blinding their night vision equipment. Farm equipment that had been logged as inactive roared to life, powerful floodlights destroying the darkness they'd planned to use for cover. "Their command post is in chaos," Shadow reported. "Communications breaking down. They're realizing none of their intel matches what they're seeing." Marcus watched through his tactical display as the cartel's professional operation disintegrated. Their carefully planned assault routes had become death traps. Every fallback position they'd identified was now a killing zone. "Sir!" Tommy's excited voice cut in. "Their helicopters are hitting bingo fuel. They have to land or retreat." Shadow, make their decision easier. 3 precise shots cracked through the night. The helicopter gunships, their targeting systems, already compromised by Echo's electronic warfare, suddenly found their tail rotors damaged. Not destroyed, Marcus's team wasn't looking to kill, but precise hits that forced emergency landings exactly where planned. "Beautiful," Knife commented. "Their air support is grounded, and their armor is trapped in the kill zones. Want us to take them now?" "Not yet," Marcus replied. "Let them realize just how complete their failure is. Echo, time for the special package." The Valley's real defensive network activated. Hidden speakers began broadcasting the cartel's own communications back to them. Every transmission they thought was secure, every command they'd given, played back in perfect clarity. The psychological impact was devastating. "They're breaking," Doc reported. "Multiple units trying to retreat, but their own vehicles are blocking the routes." Marcus keyed his radio to the cartel frequency. "Attention cartel command. You're probably wondering how your perfect intel led you into this situation. Look at your maps. Every defensive position you identified, we let you find those. Every weakness you discovered, we showed you those. You're not fighting farmers anymore. You're facing Delta Force." The cartel's response was predictable: increased aggression. Their elite teams attempted to rally, trying to fight their way out of the trap. But Marcus's team had prepared for this too. "All civilian units, execute harvest protocol," he commanded. Across the valley, local farmers implemented their practiced roles. Tractors and hay wagons, precisely positioned days ago, rolled into blocking positions. Fields suddenly flooded, cutting off escape routes. Every piece of farming equipment became part of a sophisticated containment system. "Got their command element trying to exfiltrate," Shadow reported. "Want me to take the shot?" "No need." Marcus smiled grimly. "They're heading straight for Sarah's place." Sarah's voice came over the comm, calm and professional. "Welcome wagon is ready, Marcus. They won't know what hit them." The cartel's command group, trying to escape through what their intelligence showed as an undefended farm, found themselves caught in a perfectly executed ambush. Sarah's teenage sons, trained by Knife in small unit tactics, disabled their vehicles with precise shots. The former Mexican Special Forces soldiers, trapped and disoriented, were suddenly facing farmers who fought with military precision. "Boss," Echo called out. "They're finally figuring it out. Intercepted communications show they're realizing every piece of intel they gathered was part of our plan." Marcus watched as the cartel forces' professional discipline crumbled. Their communications devolved into chaos as they discovered that every contingency plan, every fallback position, every escape route had been compromised before they even began. "All units," he commanded, "execute final harvest. Show them what a real military operation looks like. The valley's defensive network, the real one that no cartel infiltrator had ever discovered, activated in full. Every hedgerow concealed a firing position. Every drainage ditch became a communications trench. What had appeared to be a sophisticated but amateur defense was revealed as a masterpiece of special operations planning. "Remember, non-lethal takedowns only," Marcus reminded his team. "We want them alive to face justice and to spread the word about what happened here." The night erupted in calculated violence as Marcus's team demonstrated why they'd been Delta Force's elite. The cartel's professional soldiers, despite their training and equipment, found themselves systematically disarmed and captured by an enemy that had controlled the battlefield before the first shot was fired. Dawn painted the valley in shades of gold and crimson as the last cartel forces surrendered. The morning light revealed the full scope of Marcus's victory. Disabled vehicles scattered across carefully chosen positions, former special forces. Soldiers zip-tied and under guard, 3 helicopter gunships grounded exactly where planned. Final count, Doc reported. 63 prisoners all alive, mostly minor injuries. Their elite teams are actually complementing our tactical execution. Marcus watched from his command center as Sheriff Cooper's deputies began processing the scene. The cartel's supposedly perfect operation had been dismantled with surgical precision. Their professional soldiers outmaneuvered by farmers who fought with special forces expertise. "Sir," Tommy called excitedly over the radio, "you should see. Their faces. Just found out those civilian lookouts they ignored were all former military. Every farmer they dismissed was part of your plan." Shadow's voice carried professional satisfaction. "Their commander finally figured it out. He's been muttering about fighting ghosts. Says he's never seen an operation this sophisticated." The valley's transformation was now complete, but not in the way anyone had expected. What had appeared to be desperate resistance from outmatched farmers had become a masterclass in special operations warfare. "Marcus," Sarah radioed, "FBI tactical teams are inbound." Got some interesting reactions from the prisoners when they heard that. "Seems our cartel friends have warrants in multiple countries." Good. Marcus turned to his team, gathered for one final briefing. "Time to shift to Phase 6. Echo, start removing our special modifications. Knife, get the civilian teams back. Do their cover positions. Doc, make sure all medical treatment is documented properly." The cartel's captured leadership, now secured in Marcus's barn, watched with growing comprehension as their perfect intelligence was revealed as an elaborate deception. Every weakness they'd discovered had been planted. Every defensive flaw they'd exploited had been designed to trap them. "You have to understand," their commander finally said to Marcus, "we had detailed maps, surveillance photos, inside information. Everything showed us exactly what we were facing." "That was your first mistake," Marcus replied calmly. "You saw what we wanted you to see. Every informant you turned, every position you mapped, every weakness you found, we fed you all of it. In Delta Force, we learned that sometimes the best way to defeat an enemy is to let them think they've already won." FBI tactical teams arrived to find a textbook military operation completed with unprecedented precision. The evidence was overwhelming: military-grade weapons, professional contractors, documented proof of cartel activities. But more importantly, they found something unprecedented: an entire rural community trained and organized into an effective defensive force. "Quite an operation," the FBI tactical commander remarked to Marcus, "almost like it was planned by someone with extensive special operations experience." Marcus smiled slightly. "Just farmers protecting our land, Agent. Though some of us might have picked up a few skills along the way." The morning deepened as the valley began returning to normal, or what would become its new normal. Local farmers, who had fought with military precision through the night, returned to their fields. The defensive positions that had trapped cartel forces became simple irrigation ditches again. "Think they'll be back?" Knife asked, watching prisoners being loaded into FBI transports. "No," Marcus replied confidently. The cartels just learned that some territory isn't worth taking. Some enemies aren't worth making. The harvest moon had set, but its work was done. The valley had been transformed, not just into a defended position, but into a community that could protect itself. Every farmer was now a trained observer, every ranch a potential strongpoint, every daily routine a possible tactical operation. "Sir," Tommy reported one final time, "got cartel chatter from down south. They're already spreading stories. Calling this place El Valle de los Fantasmas, the Valley of Ghosts." Marcus allowed himself a small smile. Sometimes the best victory wasn't just defeating your enemy, but becoming something they'd never dare face again. A month after the battle, Marcus stood in his fields, watching the autumn harvest. The valley had healed quickly, bullet holes repaired, damaged equipment replaced, fields restored, but the changes beneath the surface were permanent and profound. Sarah's boys now helped coordinate the valley's early warning network, their farm equipment doubling as mobile observation posts. Bill Henderson's feed store had become an informal intelligence hub, where farmers shared information about unusual vehicles or suspicious activities. Even Amy's veterinary clinic maintained its dual role, monitoring medical supplies and tracking unusual injuries. "Quite a transformation," Knife remarked, joining Marcus on his morning patrol. Like the others, he'd chosen to stay, buying a small ranch on the valley's north side. "They're not just farmers anymore." "They never were just farmers," Marcus replied. "They just needed to remember what Americans have always been. People who stand together, who fight for their homes." The cartel's defeat had rippled through criminal organizations across the continent. The valley's reputation grew into something mythical, a place where elite military forces had been outmaneuvered by farmers, where professional killers had been defeated by simple ranchers. No one needed to know about the Delta Force connections. The story was powerful enough on its own. Echo, setting up his construction business, had more contracts than he could handle, his demolitions expertise now used for peaceful purposes. Docks, Clinic served the community openly while maintaining its readiness for less peaceful times. Shadow's photography business provided perfect cover for ongoing surveillance. "You know what they're calling this place down south?" Tommy asked, monitoring his drone feeds out of habit. "They say it's protected by ghosts, soldiers who appear from nowhere and vanish into the fields." Marcus smiled, watching his community go about its daily routines. Every tractor driver was now a trained observer. Every ranch hand knew military hand signals. Every farmer's kid could spot surveillance and counter-infiltration attempts. The valley had become something unique, not a military fortress, but a community that could defend itself while appearing completely ordinary. The best kind of security wasn't in weapons or tactics, but in becoming something that enemies would never dare threaten again. Ghost barked softly, alerting Marcus to approaching vehicles. But these were just normal travelers, passing through what seemed to be just another Montana farming valley. They'd never know they were being watched, evaluated, and cleared by one of the most sophisticated defensive networks ever created. "Time to plant winter wheat," Marcus said simply, turning back to his farm work. The valley's real strength wasn't in its hidden defenses or tactical positions. It was in its ability to remain exactly what it appeared to be, a peaceful community of farmers and ranchers who had learned that sometimes the best way to prevent violence was to be quietly, invisibly ready for it. The morning sun rose over Montana, illuminating a valley that would never be quite the same, yet would always appear unchanged, and that, Marcus knew, was the greatest victory of all.